The crystal champagne flute trembled in Valentina Reese's manicured fingers as the yacht's satellite phone erupted with static. She'd been watching dolphins dance through Monaco's azure waters, her billion-dollar tech empire momentarily forgotten in the Mediterranean silence. The encrypted military frequency crackled to life, cutting through the peaceful morning like a blade through silk. Any available military pilots in European airspace? This is Captain Morrison, NATO Emergency Command. We have a situation developing over the Aegean Sea. Repeat, any qualified military pilots, please respond immediately. The desperation in Morrison's voice made Valentina's pulse quicken. She recognized that tone. She'd heard it in cockpits over Afghanistan, Syria, and a dozen other theaters where death arrived on wings of steel. The billionaire tech mogul who'd revolutionized drone warfare systems felt her other life stirring beneath the designer clothes and perfectly applied makeup. Unknown aircraft designated Raven 7 has gone dark approximately 40 nautical miles southeast of Crete. No radio contact for 17 minutes. Civilian airliner Delta 449 with 236 souls aboard is currently on intercept course. We need immediate aerial reconnaissance. Valentina's breath caught. She knew those waters. More importantly, she knew what "gone dark" meant in military speak. Her fingers found the faded scar along her collarbone, a memento from her last combat mission 8 years ago. The mission that had ended her Air Force career and launched her into Silicon Valley fortune. The yacht's captain appeared at her elbow, his weathered face creased with concern. "Ma'am, there's some kind of emergency broadcast. Military frequencies are lighting up like Christmas morning." She barely heard him. Her mind was already calculating flight paths, fuel loads, and weapons systems. The nearest military base was Souda Bay, Crete, 90 minutes by helicopter, maybe less if she pushed it. But 90 minutes might be 89 minutes too long. "Captain Morrison, this is..." She paused, the words catching in her throat. It had been so long since she'd used her call sign. So long since she'd been anything other than the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley, the ruthless executive who'd built an empire on the ashes of her military dreams. "This is Valkyrie," she said finally, the name tasting like cordite and regret on her tongue. "Former Captain Valentina Reese, United States Air Force. I'm currently aboard a private vessel in Monaco Harbor, but I can be airborne in 20 minutes if you have assets available." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Then Morrison's voice returned, sharp with disbelief in something else, hope perhaps. "Valkyrie, say again your location and availability. We show you as inactive status." Valentina smiled grimly, already moving toward the yacht's helicopter pad. "Captain Morrison, inactive doesn't mean incapable. I repeat, 20 minutes to wheels up. What do you have for me to fly?" The Mediterranean morning suddenly felt charged with electricity and possibility. Valentina Reese, the billionaire, was about to remember what it meant to be Valkyrie the warrior. Morrison's voice crackled back through the static, urgent and focused. "Valkyrie, we have an F-16V Viper stationed at Naval Air Station Sigonella, Sicily. Flight time to your position is approximately 45 minutes. But ma'am," he paused, clearly wrestling with protocol and desperation, "we're talking about a potential hostile aircraft situation. This isn't a training exercise." Valentina felt the familiar ice-cold calm settling over her nervous system, the same feeling that had earned her the call sign Valkyrie during her tour in contested airspace. Her pulse actually slowed as the stakes rose higher. "Captain Morrison, patch me through to Sigonella Flight Ops. I need current weather, aircraft status, and full mission briefing. Also, I'll need my security clearance reactivated." "Ma'am, with respect, you've been out of active duty for 8 years. Military aviation protocols have." "Captain," her voice cut through his objection like a laser-guided missile. 8 years ago, I was flying combat missions in the most dangerous airspace on Earth. I've logged over 4,000 hours in military aircraft, including the F-16. More importantly, I've spent the last 8 years developing the drone warfare systems that half your fleet currently uses. I know these aircraft better than the engineers who built them. She could hear typing in the background, voices conferring in hurried whispers. The yacht's crew watched her with growing amazement as the polished socialite transformed into something harder, more focused. Her movements became economical, precise. Valkyrie, this is Colonel James Hartley, Sigonella Base Commander. I'm looking at your service record right now. A different voice, older, carrying weight. Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 silver stars and a Purple Heart, but also a medical discharge following severe injuries sustained during Operation Crimson Dawn. The scar along her collarbone throbbed at the mention. Colonel, my medical issues were related to ground-based trauma, not flight capability. I've maintained my civilian pilot's license and fly regularly. Ma'am, civilian flying is significantly different from military combat operations. We're talking about a potential hostile intercept at 35,000 feet. Valentina's jaw tightened. She'd expected this resistance, the subtle discrimination that had followed her throughout her military career. Too pretty for the cockpit, they'd whispered. Too soft for combat. She'd proven them wrong repeatedly, but the whispers never stopped. Colonel Hartley, while we're debating my qualifications, there's a civilian airliner with 236 people potentially heading into danger. I can be in that F-16 and airborne within 2 hours. Can you? Silence stretched across the frequency. Finally, Morrison's voice returned. Valkyrie, Sigonella is launching the Viper immediately. Flight Lieutenant Torres will deliver the aircraft to Monaco Harbor via the yacht's helicopter landing coordinates. You'll have full weapons systems and targeting capability. Acknowledged. What's the threat assessment on Raven 7? Unknown aircraft, non-responsive to radio contact, flying erratic patterns. Could be mechanical failure, could be hostile intent. We need eyes on target immediately. Valentina's fingers were already working her encrypted satellite phone, calling in favors from her extensive military contractor network. Within minutes, she'd arranged priority clearance, updated weather reports, and tactical frequency access. Her yacht's captain stood nearby, shaking his head in amazement. Ma'am, in 30 years of maritime service, I've never seen anything like this. She smiled grimly, already mentally running through pre-flight checks. Captain, you've never seen Valkyrie go to work. The F-16V Viper appeared on the horizon like a silver dart, its afterburners painting twin contrails across the pristine Mediterranean sky. Flight Lieutenant Torres was everything Valentina expected from a modern military pilot. Young, confident, and clearly skeptical about handing over a $40 million fighter jet to a civilian billionaire with a questionable past. Ma'am, with all due respect, Torres said as they stood on the yacht's makeshift landing pad, the Viper's engines winding down behind him. This aircraft represents the most advanced fighter technology in the NATO arsenal. I'm required to verify your current flight qualifications. Valentina pulled on her flight suit, custom-tailored. She'd maintained several over the years for her private flying, and felt muscle memory taking control. The fabric felt like coming home. Lieutenant, I've been flying military aircraft since before you were born, but I understand your concerns. She approached the F-16 with reverence, running her hands along the fuselage. The Viper was poetry in titanium and steel, every line designed for lethal efficiency. Her fingers found the access panels, the external inspection points, moving with practiced precision that made Tor's eyebrows rise. She's beautiful, Valentina murmured, checking the weapon's pylons. AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, M61 Vulcan cannon, full electronic warfare suite. Whoever equipped this bird knows their business. Ma'am, how did you know the weapon's loadout without checking the manifest? She smiled. Lieutenant, I helped design the targeting systems for the AMRAAM missiles. My company holds 17 patents on the guidance electronics. She continued her inspection, checking fuel levels, hydraulic systems, control surfaces. Each movement was textbook perfect, revealing years of ingrained training. Torres pulled out his tablet, running through standard pre-flight protocols. All right, ma'am. I need to verify your knowledge of current NATO engagement protocols, IFF systems, and emergency procedures. For the next 20 minutes, Valentina answered every technical question flawlessly. Her responses weren't just accurate, they demonstrated deep, intuitive understanding of aircraft systems and combat procedures. Tor's skepticism gradually transformed into respectful attention. Final question, ma'am. What's the maximum G-force tolerance for the F-16V during combat maneuvering? Plus 9 GS with proper G-suit and conditioning, but the human factors limit is typically 7 to 8 GS sustained before loss of consciousness. She paused, looking directly at the young pilot. I've pulled 9.2 GS in combat over Syria, stayed conscious, stayed in the fight. Torres nodded slowly, clearly impressed despite himself. Ma'am, the aircraft is yours, but I have to ask, why are you doing this? You're worth billions of dollars. You could be anywhere in the world doing anything you want. Valentina climbed into the cockpit, her hands automatically finding familiar controls. The seat fit perfectly, as if designed for her body. She looked down at Torres, her expression serious. Lieutenant, because 236 innocent people are potentially in danger, and I'm the most qualified pilot available to help them. That's what we do. We protect those who can't protect themselves. As she spoke, her voice carried undertones of authority and conviction that made Torres stand straighter. This wasn't a rich dilettante playing soldier. This was a warrior returning to her natural element. The cockpit systems came alive under her touch like an orchestra responding to a master conductor. Every switch, every display, every control felt familiar despite 8 years away from military aircraft. Valentina's muscle memory was perfect, her movements economical and precise. She ran through startup procedures with mechanical efficiency while simultaneously monitoring NATO tactical frequencies. Valkyrie to Monaco Control, requesting immediate departure clearance for military priority flight. Monaco Control to Valkyrie, you are cleared for immediate departure. Radar shows you have priority corridor to Aegean operational zone. The F-16's General Electric engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder. Valentina felt the familiar vibration through her bones, the sense of barely contained power waiting for release. This was where she belonged, strapped into the most advanced fighting machine ever created, preparing to face unknown dangers at 600 miles per hour. Sigonella Base, this is Valkyrie. Aircraft systems nominal, departing Monaco Harbor at Angels 20, proceeding direct to intercept coordinates. Valkyrie, Sigonella, you are cleared into NATO tactical network. Be advised, Raven 7 has now been silent for 34 minutes. Delta 449 is approximately 60 nautical miles from projected intercept. As the Viper lifted off the yacht's deck, Valentina felt years of civilian life falling away like discarded weight. The Mediterranean sparkled below, but her attention was already focused ahead, toward the unknown aircraft and whatever danger it might represent. Valkyrie to NATO Command, I'm reading multiple aircraft on scope. Please confirm friendly positions and threat assessment. NATO Command to Valkyrie, we show 4 friendly commercial flights in your operational area. Raven 7 remains unidentified and non-responsive. Approach with extreme caution. The F-16 climbed steadily through crystal-clear sky, its radar sweeping the airspace ahead. Valentina's hands moved across the controls with practiced grace, adjusting heading, monitoring fuel consumption, checking weapons systems. Every action was automatic, leaving her conscious mind free to analyze the tactical situation. At 25,000 feet, she encountered the first layer of mystery. Her radar showed the unidentified aircraft, but its signature was strange. Too small for a commercial airliner, too large for a fighter jet. And its flight pattern was genuinely bizarre, consisting of wide, lazy circles that made no navigational sense. NATO Command, Valkyrie has radar contact with unknown aircraft. Designate target as Bandit 1. Aircraft appears to be in a holding pattern approximately 40 nautical miles southeast of Crete. Valkyrie NATO Command, understand you have radar contact. What's your assessment? Valentina studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. Command, Bandit 1's flight profile doesn't match hostile intent. No aggressive maneuvering, no attempt at concealment. This looks more like an aircraft in distress than a threat. Copy Valkyrie. However, civilian airliner Delta 449 is still on approach vector. We need visual confirmation and communication attempts. As she closed distance with the unknown aircraft, Valentina felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 236 lives depending on her judgment, her skills, her ability to assess threats and make split-second decisions. It was exactly the kind of pressure that had forged her into one of the Air Force's most decorated pilots. Through the canopy, she could see contrails ahead, the visible signature of the mysterious aircraft that had gone silent 34 minutes ago. At 15 miles separation, Valentina's radar painted a clearer picture of the unknown aircraft. The signature was consistent with a mid-size business jet, possibly a Gulfstream or similar civilian aircraft. But something was wrong with its flight characteristics. The turns were too wide, too slow, suggesting either mechanical problems or an incapacitated pilot. Valkyrie to unknown aircraft on guard frequency 121.5. You are being intercepted by NATO military aircraft. Please respond immediately. Static filled her headphones, no response. She tried again, cycling through emergency frequencies. Unknown aircraft southeast of Crete. This is NATO fighter aircraft Valkyrie. You are in violation of controlled airspace. Respond immediately or I will be forced to consider you hostile. Still nothing, but as she closed to visual range, Valentina could see why. The business jet was flying erratically because it was clearly in distress. One engine was trailing thin smoke, and the aircraft's descent rate indicated serious mechanical problems. Through her tactical binoculars, she could see damage to the port wing, probably bird strike or mechanical failure. NATO Command, Valkyrie has visual on Bandit 1. Aircraft appears to be civilian business jet in distress. I can see structural damage and engine problems. This is not a hostile aircraft. This is an emergency. Valkyrie NATO Command. Understand mechanical distress. However, aircraft remains non-responsive to radio contact. Can you establish communication? Valentina maneuvered her F-16 into standard intercept position, matching the business jet's speed and altitude. She could see into the cockpit through the port side windows. What she saw made her blood run cold. The pilot was slumped forward over the controls, clearly unconscious. In the passenger compartment, she could make out several figures, but they weren't moving either. Carbon monoxide poisoning, she realized. The engine damage had probably compromised cabin environmental systems. NATO Command, this is Valkyrie. I have visual confirmation of unconscious crew and passengers. Appears to be carbon monoxide poisoning or similar environmental emergency. Aircraft is flying on autopilot, but that won't last much longer with engine damage. Valkyrie, what's your recommendation? She studied the tactical situation. The business jet was descending slowly but steadily. Without pilot intervention, it would eventually stall and crash. Worse, Its current heading would take it directly through the approach corridor for commercial flights into Athens. Command, I need to wake up that pilot or guide this aircraft to a safe emergency landing. But first, we need to clear civilian traffic from this entire area. Understood, Valkyrie. All commercial flights are being diverted. You have clear airspace to work. Valentina brought her F-16 closer to the distressed aircraft, close enough to see details through the windows. The pilot was a middle-aged man, probably flying his company's executives to some Mediterranean business meeting. Now he was unconscious, slowly dying from carbon monoxide while his aircraft flew itself toward disaster. She'd never faced a situation quite like this. Air-to-air combat, yes. Hostile intercepts, yes. But trying to save unconscious civilians in a damaged aircraft while preventing a potential collision with commercial traffic. This was uncharted territory even for someone with her experience. Valkyrie to NATO command. I'm going to attempt close formation flying to wake the pilot with engine noise and visual signals. Valentina positioned her F-16 directly alongside the business jet's cockpit, close enough to see the unconscious pilot's face. She triggered her afterburners in short bursts, filling the sky with thunder and flame, hoping the noise might penetrate the other aircraft's soundproofing. No response. The pilot remained motionless. She tried flying directly in front of the business jet. Hopping her aircraft's silhouette might trigger some instinctive reaction. But the man in the cockpit showed no signs of consciousness. NATO command, visual and audio attempts unsuccessful. Pilot appears deeply unconscious. I need alternatives. Valkyrie were consulting with medical personnel. Stand by. While waiting for guidance, Valentina maintained close formation with the dying aircraft. Through her tactical display, she could monitor the business jet's gradual descent. At current rate, it had maybe 20 minutes before altitude became critical. That's when she noticed something that made her stomach clench with fear. The business jet's autopilot was programmed for a specific destination, and according to her navigation systems, that destination was directly in line with Athens International Airport's primary approach corridor. In 18 minutes, Delta Flight 449 would be making its final approach to Athens with 236 passengers aboard. The unconscious business jet was on a collision course with one of the busiest commercial aviation routes in the Mediterranean. NATO command, this is Valkyrie. We have a bigger problem. Bandit 1 is headed directly for Athens approach corridor. If that pilot doesn't wake up in the next 15 minutes, we're looking at a potential mid-air collision with civilian traffic. The radio crackled with urgent voices as NATO command center erupted in activity. Multiple controllers began coordinating with Greek air traffic control, commercial airlines, and emergency services. Valentina could hear the controlled panic in their voices as the scope of the potential disaster became clear. Valkyrie, this is Colonel Hartley at Sigonella. We're patching through Dr. Sarah Mackenzie, flight surgeon with experience in aviation medical emergencies. A new voice joined the frequency, crisp and professional. Valkyrie, Dr. Mackenzie here. You mentioned carbon monoxide poisoning. Can you describe the pilot's position and visible symptoms? Valentina studied the unconscious man through her canopy. Doctor, pilot appears to be breathing but unconscious. He slumped forward but still strapped in. I can see at least 3 passengers in the cabin. All appear to be in similar states. Valkyrie, carbon monoxide poisoning at altitude can be fatal within minutes. However, if the environmental system has been compromised by engine damage, opening the aircraft to outside air might revive them. How do I do that, doctor? The cabin pressure outflow valves. If you could somehow trigger the cabin pressure system to dump internal air and bring in outside atmosphere. Valentina's mind raced. She knew aircraft systems intimately, but remotely controlling another aircraft's environmental systems was impossible. Unless. NATO command, I have an idea. It's dangerous and unconventional, but it might work. Valkyrie were listening. She took a deep breath, knowing what she was about to propose would sound insane to ground controllers who'd never faced combat situations requiring split-second improvisation. I'm going to use my aircraft's wake turbulence to destabilize the business jet's flight path. If I can create enough turbulence and pressure differential, it might trigger their emergency systems and dump the poisoned cabin air. Silence filled the radio frequency. What she was proposing was incredibly risky, flying a supersonic fighter in close formation with a damaged civilian aircraft, deliberately creating hazardous flying conditions. Valkyrie, Colonel Hartley's voice was tight with concern. That maneuver could cause complete structural failure of the civilian aircraft. Colonel, that aircraft is going to crash anyway if we don't do something. The pilot is dying, the passengers are dying, and in 12 minutes they're going to be in the path of a commercial airliner with 236 people aboard. She could hear heated discussions in the background, voices arguing about protocols, liability, and acceptable risk. But Valentina had already made her decision. She'd spent 8 years building a billion-dollar empire, but she'd spent the previous decade learning to make impossible choices under pressure. NATO command, I'm beginning the maneuver. If it works, the pressure differential should trigger their emergency systems and potentially wake the pilot. If it doesn't work, she left the sentence hanging. Valkyrie, you are not authorized to. Valentina switched off the command frequency and focused entirely on flying. Sometimes, she'd learned in combat zones from Afghanistan to Syria, you had to stop asking permission and start taking action. She positioned her F-16 above and slightly behind the business jet, calculating angles and distances with mathematical precision. The wake turbulence from her aircraft would hit the civilian plane like invisible hammer blows, potentially triggering emergency systems or causing catastrophic structural failure. The margin for error was essentially zero. Valentina engaged her afterburners and swept down across the business jet's flight path, creating a wall of turbulent air. The civilian aircraft immediately began bucking and rolling as the wake turbulence hit. She watched through her mirrors as the business jet's wings flexed under stress, hoping the airframe would hold together. The damaged aircraft dropped 300 feet in seconds, its autopilot fighting to maintain stability against the artificial turbulence. Warning lights began flashing in its cockpit as multiple systems registered emergency conditions. And then miraculously, she saw movement. The pilot's head snapped up as emergency alarms filled his cockpit. Confused, disoriented, but conscious. He grabbed the controls as his aircraft shuddered through another turbulence wave, trying to understand what was happening. Unknown pilot, this is NATO fighter Valkyrie. You have been unconscious due to carbon monoxide poisoning. Your aircraft is damaged and you're in emergency status. Static filled the frequency, then a weak voice. This is Gulfstream November 47 Alpha. I don't. What happened? My passengers. Gulf November 47 Alpha. You need to dump cabin pressure immediately and get fresh air into your aircraft. Your passengers are unconscious from co-poisoning. Through her tactical display, Valentina watched the pilot's vital signs stabilize as he followed emergency procedures. Within minutes, the passenger cabin was cycling fresh air, and the unconscious figures in the back began showing signs of revival. Valkyrie, this is November 47 Alpha. I show engine fire warning and hydraulic failure. I need immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport. Valentina felt a surge of professional satisfaction. The unconventional maneuver had worked. She'd saved 5 lives through a combination of tactical flying and medical improvisation that would probably be studied in military academies for decades. November 47 Alpha. Sauda Bay Air Base is 30 nautical miles northeast of your position. They have full emergency services and can handle your hydraulic emergency. But even as she guided the damaged business jet toward safety, Valentina realized her mission was far from over. The maneuver that had saved 5 lives had also attracted attention from sources that would prefer to remain anonymous. Her radar warning receiver began chirping insistently. 2 unknown aircraft were approaching fast from the north, their radar signatures suggesting military fighters. But they weren't broadcasting NATO identification codes. NATO Command, this is Valkyrie. I have 2 unidentified military aircraft approaching my position. Please confirm friendly forces in area. The response chilled her blood. Valkyrie, we show no friendly military traffic in your vicinity. Unknown aircraft are not responding to identification requests. As the business jet limped toward Sauda Bay under Valentina's escort, she found herself facing a new and potentially deadly situation. The 2 approaching fighters were now clearly visible on her tactical display, fast, stealthy, and operating with radio silence that suggested hostile intent. Her rescue mission had somehow triggered a military response from unknown forces. And given the current geopolitical tensions in the Mediterranean, that could mean anything from Russian probes to rogue state actors. NATO Command, unknown aircraft are now at 20 miles and closing. I need immediate identification and threat assessment. Valkyrie, we're working on identification. Maintain escort position with civilian aircraft, but be prepared for defensive action. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left her billion-dollar yacht to rescue 5 strangers in a disabled aircraft, and now she was potentially facing air-to-air combat with hostile forces. But as she checked her weapons systems and prepared for possible engagement, Valentina felt more alive than she had in 8 years. This was what she'd been born to do. Not board meetings or stock offerings or technology patents. This moment of perfect clarity, where life and death balanced on the edge of her skill and courage. The 2 hostile aircraft continued their approach, now close enough for visual identification. Through her targeting scope, Valentina could make out swept-wing configurations consistent with advanced fighter aircraft. But their exact nationality remained unclear. The planes carried no visible markings. November 47 Alpha, this is Valkyrie. Unknown military aircraft are approaching our position. Maintain course for Sauda Bay and be prepared for evasive action. Valkyrie, we're barely flying as it is. I can't maneuver this aircraft aggressively without risking structural failure. She was now protecting 5 unconscious civilians in a damaged aircraft while facing 2 hostile fighters of unknown origin. The mathematics of air combat were brutally simple, 2 against 1, with the additional burden of protecting noncombatants, gave her approximately 0 chance of survival in a sustained engagement. But Valentina had survived impossible odds before. In the skis over Syria, she'd once engaged 4 hostile aircraft simultaneously and emerged victorious. The key was turning disadvantages into advantages, using superior tactics to overcome superior numbers. NATO Command, I need immediate support. 2 bandits closing on civilian rescue operation. Valkyrie, nearest friendly aircraft are 40 minutes out. You are on your own. As the hostile fighters closed to within 10 miles, Valentina made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of running or calling for help, she was going to fight. The 2 unknown fighters had made a critical tactical error. They were approaching in standard formation, assuming their numerical superiority guaranteed victory. But Valentina had spent years studying air combat tactics, both as a pilot and as a defense contractor, developing advanced weapons systems. She knew something they didn't know. The F-16V she was flying represented the absolute pinnacle of American fighter technology, equipped with sensors and weapon systems that might be superior to anything her opponents were carrying. NATO Command, I'm going to engage the hostile aircraft. November 47 Alpha, maintain course for Souda Bay. Do not deviate regardless of what happens. Valkyrie, you are not authorized to engage without positive identification. She switched off the command frequency. Authorization was a luxury she couldn't afford when civilian lives hung in the balance. The lead hostile fighter was now within missile range, its radar clearly painting her aircraft. In seconds, she would be facing incoming weapons. But instead of defensive maneuvering, Valentina did something that violated every textbook principle of air combat. She turned directly toward the incoming fighters. The maneuver surprised her opponents, who had expected her to break away or attempt evasive action. Instead, she was closing distance at combined speeds exceeding 1,500 miles per hour, turning the engagement into a high-speed jousting match where superior tactics mattered more than numerical advantage. At 8 miles separation, her radar warning receiver screamed as the lead hostile fighter locked onto her aircraft. She had perhaps 10 seconds before incoming missiles forced her into purely defensive action. Valentina selected her AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles and achieved weapons lock on both hostile aircraft simultaneously. The F-16's advanced targeting system allowed her to engage multiple targets with devastating precision. Fox 3, Fox 3, she called as 2 missiles streaked away from her aircraft, each one guided by active radar toward a separate target. The hostile fighters immediately broke formation, launching their own missiles while simultaneously attempting evasive action. The sky filled with contrails and electronic countermeasures as 6 aircraft, 2 hostile fighters, 1 F-16, and 1 damaged business jet, maneuvered through a deadly 3-dimensional chess game. Valentina pulled 9GS in a climbing spiral, her vision graying at the edges as she fought to maintain consciousness. Through her peripheral vision, she saw one of her missiles impact the trailing hostile fighter, which exploded in a brilliant fireball that painted the Mediterranean sky with smoke and debris. 1 down, 1 to go. But the lead hostile fighter was now behind her, and she could hear the distinctive tone of incoming missiles in her headphones. The engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had fundamentally changed everything. Valentina had just shot down an aircraft of unknown nationality over international waters while protecting civilian lives. The political ramifications would be enormous, but she'd worry about that after she survived the next 60 seconds. The remaining hostile fighter was now in perfect attack position, its missiles already in flight toward her aircraft. Valentina had perhaps 8 seconds to live unless she could execute a defensive maneuver that would push both her aircraft and her body beyond their design limitations. She yanked the F-16 into an inverted dive, pulling negative GS that made her stomach feel like it was trying to exit through her throat. The incoming missiles struggled to track her erratic flight path as she descended through 15,000 feet in seconds. But the hostile fighter followed, and its pilot was clearly skilled. He anticipated her maneuvers, maintaining weapons lock even as she exceeded the F-16's recommended stress limits. That's when Valentina remembered something from her Silicon Valley years. She'd helped design the electronic warfare systems currently installed in her aircraft. She knew capabilities that even NATO might not fully understand. Time to see what 8 years of defense contracting can do, she muttered, engaging electronic countermeasures that she'd personally helped develop. The hostile fighter's radar suddenly went haywire as Valentina's aircraft began broadcasting false signals, multiple electronic ghosts that confused targeting systems. For a crucial few seconds, her opponent lost weapons lock. Those seconds were enough. Valentina reversed her dive into a climbing turn that brought her onto the hostile fighter's 6 o'clock position. At 2 miles range, She selected her M61 Vulcan cannon and achieved perfect firing solution. Guns, guns, guns. The 20 depleted uranium rounds reached out across the Mediterranean sky like deadly fingers, walking across the hostile fighter's fuselage with mechanical precision. She watched the enemy aircraft disintegrate under sustained cannon fire, its pilot ejecting seconds before the fuel tanks exploded. In less than 2 minutes, she'd engaged and destroyed 2 hostile fighters while protecting civilian lives. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Valentina realized the enormity of what had just happened. She just single-handedly fought an air-to-air engagement over international waters, using American military aircraft to destroy unidentified fighters. The geopolitical implications were staggering. NATO Command, this is Valkyrie. Hostile aircraft neutralized. November 47 Alpha is still en route to Souda Bay and requires immediate medical attention upon landing. Valkyrie, understood. We're dispatching search and rescue for the ejected pilot, and medical teams are standing by at Souda Bay. As she shepherded the damaged business jet toward the safety of the Greek airbase, Valentina felt the weight of recent events settling on her shoulders. She'd gone from billionaire socialite to combat pilot in less than 3 hours, saving lives and engaging hostile forces with a skill that would be talked about in military circles for decades. But she also knew that her old life was over. The woman who'd boarded a yacht in Monaco harbor that morning no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, more focused, someone who'd rediscovered her true calling in the crucible of combat. Souda Bay Air Base appeared on the horizon, its runways gleaming in the Mediterranean afternoon sun. As they approached for landing, Valentina could see ambulances and fire trucks positioned for the business jet's emergency landing. The damaged Gulfstream touched down smoothly, its pilot managing a textbook emergency landing despite hydraulic failures and engine damage. As medical teams rushed toward the aircraft, Valentina circled overhead, watching 5 people she'd saved emerge into the sunlight. November 47 Alpha crew and passengers are safe, she reported to NATO Command, requesting permission to return to Sigonella for debriefing. Valkyrie, that's a negative. You're to proceed directly to NATO Southern Command in Naples. Admiral Richardson wants to speak with you immediately. As her F-16 climbed away from Crete, Valentina realized that her life had irrevocably changed. She'd proven that 8 years of civilian life hadn't diminished her combat skills. If anything, her experience in the defense industry had made her more lethal, not less. The question now was what NATO intended to do with a pilot who just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in their current roster. But as the Italian coastline appeared ahead, Valentina felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years: complete professional satisfaction. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was born to do. Whatever came next, she was ready. The NATO Southern Command facility in Naples buzzed with activity as Valentina's F-16 touched down on the secure runway. She could see military personnel and civilian officials waiting near the hangar, their expressions suggesting that word of her actions had already reached the highest levels of command. As she shut down the aircraft systems, Valentina reflected on the surreal nature of her day. 12 hours ago, she'd been sipping champagne on a yacht. Now she was being debriefed by NATO's top brass after single-handedly engaging hostile fighters over the Mediterranean. Admiral Richardson was waiting as she climbed down from the cockpit, his weathered face impossible to read. Behind him stood a collection of military officers, intelligence officials, and at least 2 people who looked like they belonged in government offices rather than on air bases. "Captain Reese," the admiral said, his voice carrying decades of command authority. "Or should I say Valkyrie?" "Sir, I prefer my call sign." She removed her helmet, her hair spilling out in a cascade that somehow managed to look perfectly arranged despite hours in a fighter cockpit. I assume you want a complete debrief of today's actions. Captain, what I want is to understand how a retired Air Force pilot managed to outfight two hostile aircraft while simultaneously conducting a civilian rescue operation. Your performance today was unprecedented. They walked toward the secure briefing facility, passing technicians who were already examining her aircraft systems and weapons expenditure. Valentina noticed several individuals taking photographs and measurements. Clearly, her F-16's performance was being analyzed in detail. Admiral, I acted according to established NATO protocols for civilian aircraft in distress. When hostile forces threatened that mission, I responded with appropriate force. Richardson paused at the entrance to the briefing room. Captain, those hostile forces.